Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. And today we have a great social entrepreneur with us. We have Angela Parker, who's the co-founder and president of Realized Worth. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Devin. Great to be here.
Angela, your company, Realized Worth, helps large companies, folks like McDonald's, the UN, SAP, with implementing volunteer programs, which I just love. But you've really become, it's my impression, rather sophisticated about how you approach organizing a volunteer program for impact, not only on the people you serve, but on the people who are serving and the company that employs them. Tell us, just to give us a quick overview of your thought process around the strategy for implementing a volunteer program.
I'd love to, thanks. Well, there's a whole concept called transformative learning theory. We were actually doing this work before we realized that it aligned with transformative learning theory, but it's great to know there's some academics and some science behind this stuff. The idea is that volunteering itself is a great thing to do. Most people feel like they should do it, at least in North American cultures. But if you've done it a lot, you probably know that there's sometimes this feeling of I almost feel guilty because I received more than I gave in the end. And I go and I volunteer because I need it. It's good for me. It's my therapy, some people say. And we actually think that's the greatest value ultimately of volunteering, that if individuals can be affected by the work that they do, by interacting with people groups or issues that they don't interact with on a daily basis, even issues that might make them uncomfortable, ideally something that takes them outside of the prejudices really that they have about these people and issues, then they're affected on a behavioral level, on a psychological level, on an attitudinal level, and then the decisions that we make based on that experience change. We begin to make decisions based on empathy and compassion because of those interactions. And we think that if individuals are affected on that level, especially in companies, because companies, at least in this stage of our existence, are so influential in the world, then we can see, in a very literal sense, world change.
Fantastic. Angela, let's jump in. You've provided readers with 5 tips, and I want to just, our time is short. Let's talk about each one for just a minute. Your first tip relates to something you were just saying, this idea that sometimes we feel like we need to volunteer because it feels so good. You say don't just volunteer because you should, volunteer because you need to. What do you mean by that?
Well, as you'll see if anybody decides to take a look at the article, there's this concept that Celtics, particularly in Ireland, call thin space. And if you've had a child, if you remember falling in love for the first time, or even sometimes a traumatic event, or going hiking and getting to the peak and seeing this beautiful sunset come over the ridge, and there's just this moment when it feels like everything makes sense. You know what you're here for, this moment of epiphany, really. Those moments are few and far between. They don't happen to us all the time, but sometimes when we volunteer, there's just this space because we're ready. It's the right time, and it becomes a thin space. There's just a tear in the fabric of space and time, and we can see something beyond ourselves in that moment that reminds us really of our own humanity. When, in particular, we sit across from, for example, a man or a woman who say they've been in jail or they're homeless, and in conversation with them, and when we look in their face, we realize that we're the same, that we all have equal value, that just because we're alive, just because we were born, there's an inherent value there, and that means something about the way that we live. When we go and we volunteer, we can potentially be affected in that way, and it's essential to understand that we are receiving something when we give, and maybe that receiving something is more important. So when we go into it expecting not to go and do something we have to do because we should, but when we go in expecting to receive, our posture changes. And I think that puts us in a position where we can even offer more value ultimately.
I think that's a great insight. And your second point is that you should posture yourself as ready to receive from the person you are serving, and to not think of the people you're helping as objects to fix. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we teach to volunteer champions or volunteer ambassadors at companies, we take them through these trainings where we're essentially teaching them to provide a transformative, what we call a transformative space in volunteering. And one of the things they do is they have a brief. Now, most organizations will have some kind of brief at the beginning of a volunteer activity where they tell you what to do and where to go and where the bathrooms are. That's great. But this brief, the intention of it is to create what's called a disorienting dilemma. So the example given in the article is a good one. I mean, when we think about, again, homeless people, and we tend to think maybe when we go serve at a soup kitchen that we're part of solving hunger. But really, in an evening serving dinner at a soup kitchen, hunger is not going to be touched. So when during that brief, this is my first experience with a brief like this, was at a homeless shelter, and the guy giving the brief said, when you're here today, I want you to spend the time taking a look around. And if you can bring yourself to do it, sit down across from one of these men that you're serving and have a conversation with them, because they're told on a daily basis, get off my stoop, get out of my way, go get a job. They are told that they have no value. And what you're doing here is not solving hunger. The poor are not a problem to be solved. You are telling these people in this 3 hours that you're here this evening that you are worth my time. And sitting across from them is far more valuable tonight than serving them a meal. Speaking to them like they're human is far more valuable tonight than that. And going into it with that explanation at the beginning and me thinking, no, I'm here to do a task that this nonprofit organization needs me to do. I'm a middle-class white woman. I get stuff done. I am productive. That's what I'm here for. But to go and to think, wait, this experience is about communicating value to someone and just being here with them was very disorienting for me. And that's an important part of going into the experience, is saying, okay, we're not just here to do like we tend to always do. This isn't about being productive. This is about humanity. This is about society. This is about systemic change that needs to take place. And if we go in and just do the task and get out, I don't know if we can offer that much value there. But if we posture ourselves differently, then things begin to change.
Yeah, that's a great insight, certainly consistent with some of my experiences as well. Now, your third point is a little bit scary. It's to make yourself vulnerable, meaning open yourself up to attack. Holy cow. What are you saying here?
Well, I do want to make myself clear. That can be a sensitive way a sensitive word to use. There are a lot of people that are just vulnerable because that's their situation in life. And there are people probably listening to this that are in a place where they think, I can't make myself any more uncomfortable than I already am right now, any more stressed out. I'm not recommending that you go and stress yourselves out or put yourself in a scenario where it's traumatizing by any means. But if you're in a place in life where you're thinking, yeah, I need something to shake me up, I need something to break me out of my way of thinking, then yeah, maybe consider something that's less comfortable than what you've done before. If you have a cause that you love, then look for a way to interact with that cause more directly. To go to get your hands a little dirtier is really the recommendation there, because it is that breaking outside of our comfort zones that most of us know tend to change us a little bit in a way that we can't go back.
Yeah. Great insights. And then your fourth point is to develop a real, to connect with people that make you uncomfortable. That seems like an interesting suggestion, to intentionally make yourself uncomfortable.
Yeah, again, it's really a similar point. One of the concepts behind transformative learning theory is that when an experience gradually changes us over time, that tends to be more valuable. It's almost like it's more valuable to lose 2 pounds a week when you're trying to lose weight than to lose 10 pounds a week. I mean, it's just not healthy. You end up going back to where you started if you go too extreme. However, sometimes there are moments of what's referred to in the theory as trauma that do change us forever. And that's what I mentioned a second ago. For example, if you've been on an international volunteering trip or even just visited somewhere internationally where you're struck by, say, the gap between the wealthy and the poor, that can be traumatizing, and that changes the way we understand the world. So while I would recommend that we be wary of what's referred to as voluntourism or be wary of looking at people in need as some sort of circus, as something to observe for the interest of it. And there's a respect factor that needs to take place, but it's sometimes very valuable to go overseas or to go somewhere extremely unfamiliar, because again, that's a little bit uncomfortable and that can break us out of our typical prejudices and ways of thinking.
Yeah, great point. And your last point is an easy one, I think maybe an important one, and that is to go easy. What do you mean by go easy?
Yeah, well, most of us, we know what we want for ourselves. We know what we should do. There's a lot of pressure to be certain things, to try harder, to be more, to advance at work, to be with our kids more often, and to volunteer. And there are a lot of great corporate programs, and you might, if you work at one of these companies that, for example, Realized Worth works with, who have great corporate volunteering programs, you might receive 3 emails a week asking you to be involved in some event or some great corporate program. And it's not that the program isn't good, but sometimes you're just not in a place in life where it's time to get involved, or you're already involved in ways that are essential for the place you are in life right now. So again, it's a voluntary, we're supposed to get involved in something and move beyond our comfort zone when we're ready for that. And epiphanies and thin spaces don't happen because we force them. They happen because we're ready. So go easy on yourself, and just the idea of opening yourself up to life change or to prejudice change or to consider someone else's perspective, doing that on a day-to-day basis in your regular life is enough to just go there in your mind. And then when you feel ready to make yourself vulnerable or go out and experience a people group or an issue that you haven't experienced before, then do that, but just when you're ready.
Great. Now, Angela, you have really become a role model to a lot of people as you've implemented these programs around the world. In fact, you're joining me today from Bangalore, right?
I am, that's right.
Yeah, so traveling the world, meeting all these people, training them. Again, you're an icon. Who do you look up to as a role model?
Well, I got to say that I love the question because it causes me to reflect on how many really wonderful people surround me, from family to friends to colleagues. I really have a lot of people in my life I want to be like. But this question always brings me back to my angry 16-year-old self back in high school, my sophomore year, and Mrs. Brooksby. And she was a teacher who, I don't know, somebody less qualified or less mature, I'm not sure what the word is, would have taken my bad attitude personally. But we had this paper once where we had to compare Emily Dickinson with Walt Whitman, both poets who I have come to admire. But I decided at that time that Emily Dickinson was the worst, and I loved Walt Whitman. And I did not want to write this paper, so I decided I was going to take the time to express whatever anger I was dealing with at that stage of my life, and just went on about Emily Dickinson and what an idiot she was. I feel terrible admitting this, but it was a non-academic way to express how badly I thought of Emily Dickinson. And then to an equally absurd degree went on and on about how great Walt Whitman was. So any other teacher would have given me an F and kicked me out of honors English, but she sat me down and said, "You're one of the few students whose passion I believe." And then she said, "Now take it home and write it in a way that doesn't cause you to lose your platform." And I was like, okay, I get it. Like I get that if I speak about it that way, I'm no longer heard, and I want to be true to my own voice. And she could have shamed me. She could have written me off, but she looked beyond herself and what she could have taken personally, and she empowered me with criticism. And I have thought of that advice almost every day for 20 years.
Oh, that's great. That is a great role model, a great story to make the point. Now, we haven't talked about your founder's roots, where this came from, but tell us why it is that you care so passionately about volunteerism to build a business around it. Why do you personally feel responsible for this?
If I can be really honest, I think it's that I have control issues. I don't like being told what I have to do. I don't like being told what I can't do. And I don't like feeling powerless. And I was raised in relative privilege. I was born in the US. I have a great education. I had access to education. I have family and friends that support me. I'm able to work. And if I, in my relatively privileged position, can ever feel powerless, I can't imagine how people who are born into poverty, who are born in a difficult part of the world, who are born into a race that puts up barriers against them, I can't imagine how difficult and how, well, disempowering life can be for that group of people. So on both levels, my own desire to have a sense of power leads to an empathy that makes me want to provide a sense of power for those people who are less privileged than myself. And so both having a business and having a business that creates space where people's empathy increases through their experience with other people groups, both of those things together sort of serve what I need for my life, if that makes sense. So without sounding too terribly selfish, building a business and running it the way that I believe businesses should be run, as well as setting up volunteer programs that empower people, those two things just completely serve my life passion.
Oh, that's great. Now, I want to ask you, we ask all of our guests for an impact hack, some tip that would help us to do more good. Now, you've given us 5 great tips for volunteering, but maybe you would give us one more tip to help us in a more general way to do more good. What's yours?
Well, as I'm thinking about this question, I realize that maybe this has been the theme of today's interview. There's a theory in psychology called nonviolent communication. I recommend looking it up. It's actually a fascinating way to learn to do relationships better. And what they say is it's very difficult to be present to the needs of other people if we're not present to our own needs. So as any entrepreneur out there knows, it is really easy to work too much and too hard and burn ourselves out in building a business, and especially if it's something that you have a passion for. You feel guilty when you take time off because everything depends on you, or at least that's what it feels like. But I guess by trial and error, I'm learning that I've got to be present to my own needs first. And what that means is, I'm learning, is every feeling, every emotion, whether anger or irritation or even happiness or joy, that we have indicates a need that we have. Every feeling means something. So while it's really hard to suddenly just be healthy and be present to our own needs, one great tip or hack is, in order to get to where we can have greater impact in life, is to, with every feeling we have, think, what is the need that this is indicating? Just to ask yourself that question. And what I'm learning is that the more you can identify those needs, the more you can be present to other people's needs, and then eventually get to the impact that you intended in the first place.
Oh, that's a great insight. I really appreciate you helping us think that through. Fantastic. Well, Angela, before you go, I want you to, if you would, take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about your work and connect with you personally.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from anyone. My Twitter handle's on the screen. It's @AngelaJean. The Realized Worth, my company Twitter handle, is @RealizedWorth. You can also look at our website at realizedworth.com.
Fantastic. Well, Angela, thank you very much for being with us today. We wish you every success in creating more volunteers in this world.
Thank you, Devin. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All righty. Let's do some good.